This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and I started taking an ADHD test, but I lost interest. My co-host is John Pasden, and he's a big fan of sidewalks because they've been keeping the people off the streets for years. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you from Utah here in the United States.
Hey, I'm John Pasden. I am in Shanghai, China. And happy 2025年, everybody.
Yes, happy year 2025. We've made it, John. Almost never would have thought after that year of 2020. And now we are also staring down the barrel of the Chinese New Year. What's this year been? It's been the year of the...
Forgot.
I forgot too. Very memorable year.
Believe it or not, the Chinese zodiac does not play a significant role in my life these days.
But year of the snake next year. Year of the snake. So
right.
I do know that for whatever reason.
Okay, so anyway, it is January. It is a new year. And, you know, a lot of people every year, they say, this is the year I'm going to finally learn Chinese. And since this is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast, it feels like a good time to address this question because, Jared, you know, some of these people who promise themselves they will finally learn Chinese this year, they don't actually make it.
That's right. I mean, you know, you can buy, you subscribe to the different apps and download everything. But oftentimes by March, you find like you've fallen off, or maybe you don't even make it to March. And so why does this happen?
More importantly, how can this year be different?
So today we are going to talk about how you can finally make this the year of you learning Chinese and how to stick with it and figure it all out for yourself.
Yeah, so we're going to cover this issue from a number of different angles, and hopefully some of them will resonate with you and you'll get some advice that will help you to finally make progress this year.
So I think a great place to start here, John, is to first talk about why do New Year's resolutions often fail?
Well, I think sometimes we're too ambitious. I mean, it's similar to like the whole gym thing. Like you start off going to the gym for 2 hours every day, that's not going to last. And similarly, your Chinese studies might be a bit overambitious. Maybe you're trying to do an hour every day or something like that, and it might just be too much too soon.
And I think another important thing is like this lack of clarity. So you might say, okay, this is the year I'm going to learn Chinese. Well, what does that mean? I mean, I kind of feel like, hey, you learn Chinese. Do you speak Chinese? Yeah. But how are you going to measure that? Like, what is that actual goal? Because just saying you're going to learn Chinese, it's too vague. And so you're not even sure what success looks like. And so it's really kind of hard to track progress and to kind of feel, some accomplishment or motivation along the way.
And speaking of motivation, you might feel super motivated in the beginning of the year, but can you rely on that? Is that really going to take you through the whole year and last while your Chinese improves? And not only that, but if your motivation does flag, are you going to go into a guilt spiral?
That's right. You're like, I'm garbage. I'm not learning. So those feelings and thoughts can be very demotivating along the way. And then you kind of get this burden of shame, and learning Chinese becomes more of a drag and a burden and can really weigh you down. So how can we avoid these traps? Well, I think the first step in this is first, you need to make sure you are framing up your resolution properly. And in doing that, you need to make sure that you are clear about why you are learning Chinese. If you've been listening to this podcast any length of time, you've heard John and I talking about this. You need to understand why you are learning Chinese. And there are a variety of reasons that you could learn Chinese, and they're all fine. They can all work for you. But you need to make sure you find what is your reason why you're learning Chinese. And if you don't have a good reason, then chances are you're probably not going to get very far in your studies.
And you need to be more specific about it. It's not just learn Chinese, but what really are you focusing on? Because, it's not learn 10,000 characters and master all the tones and have a 10,000 word vocabulary. It's got to be something smaller than that, right?
Yeah, I think that's, achievable goals, like setting very specific things. And I guess, as John, good also talk about that. We're talking about specific goals. While I'm talking about specific reasons, that might be like, oh, well, hey, I want to be able to, enjoy this show in Chinese, or I really want to be able to have a conversation with this person, or there's this person I really admire, and I want to be like them. And, they've kind of inspired me. And so that's one of my motivations for learning Chinese. Or maybe I just enjoy the language. It's just learning a new language. It's something very interesting to me. So those can all be kind of your purposes, kind of your underlying reasons to really learn. But you kind of need to have something like that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I think the specifics of your goals, they should line up with your motivation. So for example, if your goals are related to, human communication and human connections, then maybe you can cut yourself some slack on the character learning. But, conversely, if you really want to be able to read a book, like maybe don't hit the listening practice so hard if you actually hate it, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So make sure that those goals are tailored around your reasons for learning. Like maybe I'm going to try to have, by the end of this year, I want to be able to have a 5 or 10 minute conversation in Chinese. Hey, that's a pretty cool goal, but you need to have some smaller ones along the way, of course.
Okay, so then after you figure that out, I think one thing that you should do is focus more on the process and not just on outcomes. So, learn Chinese is obviously not very specific outcome, but also that's the outcome instead of the process. And the process is what you're actually going to do. So maybe you're just going to study for 10 minutes every day. Maybe you're going to, do Duolingo every day, or maybe you're going to read something every day, but you want to form a habit. And if you can form that habit, then you're focusing on the growth, right? This growth mindset, and not just, I have to, achieve this one thing.
Absolutely. So it can be doing different learning activities at specific times or during specific activities. Maybe you are running a couple miles every day on the treadmill or outside. Well, maybe that's your time to listen to some Chinese podcasts like this. But there's other podcasts out there, of course, about actually learning, you're going to get some language exposure. Or John, I remember one big thing for me was when I was riding the subway, commuting to work in the morning, I would read graded readers in Chinese. And that was a dedicated study time for me.
Yeah. And one thing I've been doing is every single day on the subway on the way to work, I use Duolingo. And I study a little bit of Italian every day, and also on the weekends.
John, you went to Italy for some conference recently, right?
Yeah, I did, related to the Chinese Grammar Wiki. That was a really awesome trip, and it really motivated me. I want to talk about that more when we talk more about specific types of motivation. But definitely a trip to the country can really be motivating.
And also about, setting some of these goals, you need to think long term, not just, even the 12 months or just a month by month or 12 months. So learning a language, it can be a lifetime journey. So you may not be fluent by June, but imagine where you're going to be by the end of the year if you just keep going. There's this quote that kind of comes to mind, and I'm having trouble remembering exactly the quote. I'm going to butcher it, but the idea behind it is that sometimes you might want to give up, but if you look at like where you are right now, and then compare that to like a year ago, you probably would have given up a whole bunch to be where you are right now. And so it's like, hey, you may not be totally to that end stage of fluency, the F word, right? Where you'd want to be, but you've made progress. And if you were starting out today, the progress you've already made and what you've learned, it's still a good level of accomplishment compared to someone just starting from zero.
And you've probably heard this before, but, people tend to overestimate what they can achieve in the short term and underestimate what they can achieve in the long term. So rather than, hoping to pass HSK3 in the first 3 months of the year, you should just be happy to make decent progress this year, because if you can keep doing that year over year, then in less time than you think, you'll actually be fairly fluent. And the key thing is to just be somewhat consistent and have progress rather than having this crazy, steeply climbing graph of progress. You just need some progress and keep at it.
Words of wisdom.
Okay, so on that note, remember, you want to start fairly small. You don't want to give yourself like this giant, task that you have to do every day or some quota that's just super intimidating every week. You want to get into a habit, something that you enjoy, but that if you are kind of busy or don't feel like doing it that much one day, you can still get it done.
And this is really important because most people are not in an immersive environment. And some people are. And you may be super motivated and maybe you're starting some immersion program in some small town in China, Taiwan for the next year. Okay, great. You probably are going to be spending, 5-6 hours a day in an immersive, Chinese learning environment. But most of people are not. So you do need to start small. We do have lives, you have relationships, work, all sorts of things going on. So being consistent in small ways can get you a lot further than just binging on learning sessions, once a week or maybe a couple times a month.
Yeah, and to use my Duolingo example, like there are some days when I'm feeling motivated and I'll do a couple lessons. Maybe I'll do 20 or 30 minutes, like first thing in the morning. But there are other times when I really don't feel like it. And so on those days, I don't not do it. I just do the minimum amount, which for me is to just review the flashcards. And, then I have to listen to the audio. I have to read the words and, think about them a little bit. And so I'm doing review and I'm not forgetting. I'm maybe not making great progress, but I'm not forgetting and I'm staying in that habit.
It's also important to create some sort of accountability. And now there's a lot of ways to go about doing this. It's something that works for me, John, is I have a regular session with a tutor every week. And that helps me at least stay on track. It's a standing appointment on my calendar, and I always know it's going to be happening. But you can find a language partner. You can join a class. You can get a tutor. There's also a lot of people will do like studygrams. A lot of people do this on Instagram. So they're kind of tracking their studying, or they may vlog about that and create videos. So there's a whole lot of ways to create some sort of accountability with others and sharing your progress, learning together and having different tutors.
Yeah, what I do is my son and I, we both use Duolingo and we're studying different things and we just kind of keep each other going, remind each other. And sometimes he encourages me to try to make a certain rank, and, that competition stuff it's kind of annoying. It doesn't really drive me, but he gets into it. And because he's pushing me, it actually does work. So,
That's great. That's great. That's kind of cool because you're creating some sort of competition, right? And you can also make like real world milestones. You may book a trip to China, or maybe not to China. You could book a trip to Chinatown if there's one in your area or somewhere close by. And so, you got something you're working towards.
And hopefully you're also making it fun. Like, don't forget that it doesn't have to be, flashcards or Duolingo. You can also be watching stuff on TV and YouTube or even TikTok. You can maybe be playing some kind of games, doing music. And as long as you're engaged in it and you're actually listening and paying attention, then you're making progress.
And speaking of progress, track your progress. So there are a lot of ways you can go about this. If you're reading, that's an easy way to track progress. You can say, hey, how many pages have I read? How many books have I read? How much time have I spent reading? You can also track, how many words you're reading per minute, or is our characters per minute. Those are all really good indicators and ways to track some progress in relation to reading.
Yeah, I've had real success with progress tracking. Like, one of the things I do is I weigh myself every weekday morning, which, is kind of boring and maybe depressing. But if I don't do that, then I know I'll just slowly just start to gain weight, like week over week. And so I'm not too strict about diet and exercise. Like, I do try to do it, but if I weigh myself, then I always have in the back of my mind, I know where I'm at. And it helps me stay on track. And I know some people, they track their progress on something that's visible, like a piece of paper on a wall. They put an X on the calendar when they do their workout or they practice their Chinese or whatever. I find that those kinds of really visual, physical progress tracking can be super useful.
Yeah, that's why we do sticker charts for kids. But hey,
Yes.
You can have a sticker chart for adults.
Whatever
Cool.
stickers you want.
That's right. You get Chinese stickers. It's all good.
Or just red circles, doesn't matter.
But there's so many different ways to track your progress. There's apps for tracking those. And when we're talking about tracking progress, it doesn't necessarily have to be filling out one of those trees on Duolingo. There are just apps for tracking habits. You can say, hey, did I do this today? And so if you have these small goals, or you have daily goals or weekly goals, track those. See how you're doing. That is important. I love the analogy you're giving, John, about, weighing yourself, every day. It's just, you kind of get an idea of where you're at. And you can also look back and say, hey, I put in pretty good effort this month or this week or this year even. And if you don't have that, it's kind of hard to go back and really evaluate your efforts against how things are turning out for you.
And on this topic, I want to point something out because I think it made a difference for me. So I used to have one of these smart scales where I weigh myself and then it records it to my phone. And so, super simple. I have the data. But what I found was when it saves it to my phone, I couldn't do anything with that data. It wasn't easy to export it. And I didn't like the stats that it gave me. And so eventually I just switched over to recording my own numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, because when I had them in the spreadsheet, I could do whatever I wanted with the data, and I could, create graphs and like all this stuff. I wanted to have like a 10-day running average and track that and stuff like that. If you're into that and your app doesn't let you do it, well, then don't let the app like ruin the effect of the progress tracking that you could be getting.
That's pretty cool. That's a good insight.
And I wouldn't call it cool, Jared, but it works for me.
And along the way, you got to celebrate these small wins that you encounter. So, something good happens. That's great. And you can track that as well. But along this path, you are going to have some setbacks. So you need to give yourself a little bit of room, some grace, if you will, if things don't totally turn out the way that you're hoping or plan.
Yeah, I like to use the weight tracking example once again. I sometimes just stop tracking my weight on vacation and
come back 10 pounds heavier.
Yeah, there's always that risk. And I never come back lighter, let me tell you. But I just don't need the additional stress. And like, I know I'm going to enjoy food a little bit more than usual over the holidays. And so I expect to work a little bit more after the holiday. But, you got to enjoy life too. And I don't think anyone is going to enjoy a habit if it just pushes them to the limits of austerity, just for the sake of this goal.
Exactly. And so you're going to miss some days once in a while, and you need to give yourself a little room for that. And John, for me, later this last year, I just had a lot of stress. I had a lot of things going in my life. And if you remember, I just had to shelve my tutor sessions for a month. I think it was 6 weeks even. And it just it was becoming a bit of a drag, a bit of a burden at that time, and not as enjoyable. And so I'm like, look, I just needed to sort some stuff out. It was just going on. And so I did. And now I'm back at it and I'm feeling much better. So you may need to even take a little bit of break and then come back at it. And because life can be hard, stress creeps up on you and things change. And you got to roll with that. You got to adapt with it. But, take the time you need, sort things out, sort yourself out, and then get back in it.
Yeah, I was doing pretty well going to the gym and making progress in my strength training goals. But then work got too busy and I just couldn't make it to the gym. And I knew that it wasn't going to change for a little bit. And rather than stressing out about that, because I really didn't want to lose that progress. Rather than stressing out about it, I just switched to like a home calisthenics program. And I don't like it as much, but it was something. And I just had to be flexible.
That's right. So roll with the punches, give yourself a little grace. And some people might say, hey, no, I don't want to do anything like that because, if I stop, then I'll never get going again. Well, the main point behind this is that you want this to be something that's energy creating and not something that's draining for you. And if you find that your studies are dragging you down and it's creating a source of stress and anxiety for you, well, that's probably a good indication that you might need to change things up, or you may need to take a little break and regroup. And so this is the whole thing about planning for setbacks. Life changes, your circumstance changes, your motivations may change as well. And so you need to be always reassessing those and to figure out what's going to work for you moving forward.
Yeah, and try not to always make it a binary thing. Like, I'm going to do it. Oh, no, I have to quit. It's not that binary. Stay flexible.
So how can we keep ourselves motivated throughout the year. So there are a lot of ways to approach this. And John, first off, even talking about motivation, I think there's some of the things talking about motivation out there, and discipline is better than motivation. And I think that is actually a good point, because motivation can come and go, but that doesn't mean that motivation isn't important, because being motivated definitely helps us to get started, and it can help us develop some of these habits.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, right? Like, why do you need to have discipline if you're not motivated to do it, right?
Exactly. So here are a few ideas for all of you guys figuring out how to get motivated and how to get started, and maybe even to get remotivated throughout the year if things are start dragging. So one good way is to join a challenge. There are lots of different organizations out there and groups, Chinese learning groups and stuff, where they have, like maybe a 30-day challenge or maybe in a week challenge. So you can go out and look for some of those. And those are great ways to get involved with other people and find some motivation to achieve some short-term goal.
It's also pretty easy to do with a friend. Like, you can do it with 2 people or 3 people. It doesn't have to be a big group.
Where can you find these? Well, there's on Reddit, there's a Chinese language subreddit. There's lots of different WeChat groups, Discord groups. And even know like Ola Linga on Hacking Chinese, he does some frequent challenges for Chinese learners.
Yep. Another thing you might try is something more immersive. Like, for example, today, or maybe not the whole day, maybe like this afternoon, I'm going to speak only Chinese or listen to only Chinese. No English allowed.
Yeah, you can also have, like I said, only Chinese media day. I'm only going to listen to Chinese shows or watch only Chinese movies or sitcoms on this day. You can also decide to explore different hobbies that might be related to Chinese. Maybe you will enjoy writing characters and you might get involved in some calligraphy, or maybe kung fu or something or I should say gong fu, right?
Yeah. But I got to say, Jared, for me, the most compelling motivation is always like a trip. So to get back into the example of me going to Italy last year, I was never that interested in learning Italian. My mom learned Italian when she was in college. She studied in Rome. I didn't care, right? I worked with some Italians at a company, when I used to do Chinese pod, there was Italian pod, and I worked with those people. And I could have learned Italian then, like pretty well, but I wasn't that interested. I was busy. And so it wasn't until I had this trip coming up to Naples, Italy, that I was like, I'm going to be in Italy for almost a week. I'm going to have some good food. Why don't I just try to learn some Italian and make the most of this trip? And so that really motivated me. So I was able to study for a good solid month, use Duolingo, buy some phrase books, use Chat GPT to help me learn some Italian. And it turned out pretty well, and it really motivated me.
Wow, that's really cool. I think those are wonderful things. Having some sort of goals and having trips, I think, are a wonderful thing to help you keep motivated.
All right, but here's the thing. After the trip, and I came back to Shanghai, I didn't have another trip planned. So then is my motivation going to just fall off a cliff? Because, yeah, I did have some good conversations in Italian, but I also had plenty of moments that made it very real that my Italian was very basic. And I decided that I really wanted to take my family to Italy. They hadn't been to Italy. They still haven't been. And we came up with a plan, and we're going to go back to the US this coming summer by going through Europe, and we're going to visit Rome.
Wow.
And so knowing that I'm going back in a couple months does definitely help me stay motivated.
Well, that's a pretty cool story, John. I'm very interested to see how this all works out for you.
All right. So I hope that some of our listeners can possibly revisit this idea of going to China. I know China can be quite an ordeal to just, figure out the whole visa thing, and it's so far away. But if you can make it, it could really help your motivation.
Now, I will put a quick side note in on this, John, is that it was just over a year ago, Xi Jinping announced a program to bring about 50,000 American students to study in China over the next 5 years. And if you are involved in high school or university Chinese language programs, you may come across opportunities to go to China. You might have to buy your own plane ticket, but in-country things are heavily subsidized or even fully paid for. So I have taken my kids on a trip like that last year, and there are many that are coming out. So that's mainly for U.S. citizens and pretty much students, but they're out there. Those things are happening this year.
Nice.
So there's a whole lot of different ways to kind of keep your motivation going. And hopefully this has been helpful to you to, think about how to approach some of your New Year's resolutions. But John, I think what I want to kind of end on and refocus on is also revisiting like your why. Like, why are you learning? What is the main reason that you're learning Chinese? Because this may change throughout your whole journey. It may change throughout the year. It could be changed throughout the month. I've known people that, they originally started learning Chinese just because they thought it was going to be like, a good challenge, and they were up for a challenge. But as they got into it, over time, they made friends and maybe a new world opened up to them from Chinese. And so their motivation, the reason to learn turned from, being like, oh, this is a real interesting, a challenging thing to, wow, I really enjoy these people, these friendships, and, maybe even they've may have met a special someone, like you, John, with Chinese. And so their whole reason for learning and continuing to learn changes. And that's okay. That's totally fine if your reasons change, but it's making sure you understand that and understanding why that you're learning this language is something that will sustain you throughout your language learning journey.
And your why changing and evolving may even be something to strive for. I mean, if you end up visiting China and you make new friends and that propels your motivation to a new level, I mean, isn't that even better? And I think that we can all expect changes and they might all be good, but your why may not always stay what it began as.
And just reiterating that is okay. It's okay for it to change. But the key thing, though, is that you need to continue to have that reason. And John, I will say that for some people, their why kind of goes away. It can't happen. Okay, I started learning and maybe I've got to some, level of fluency here, but now I don't really have a reason that's helping me to continue to learn Chinese. So if that is you and you're kind of falling off, well, you need to find another reason if you want to continue in your progress.
And you definitely can. You just got to explore it a bit.
So go out there, make sure you always understand your why. Surround yourself with inspiration. You can build a community around yourself. And remember, language is a tool for communication. I mean, some people may be learning just purely for intellectual curiosity, for academic reasons, but language is a tool. It's out there for communicating. So build a community and use it to connect. And the thing about this, though, is that you can learn this language. And there are a lot of ways to keep yourself going, keep yourself motivated, and to make this a year, not just for learning Chinese, I think that's too general, right? But, make this a year, a goal for something, to achieve something with your Chinese, to make some sort of measurable progress that you can recognize and realize.
And make learning Chinese a habit, something enjoyable. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount, but bit by bit, it's really becoming something real. Make it a habit and make it a bigger part of your life.
And there's a classic Chinese saying, I think you probably know what it is, John, but it said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.
Oh yeah, so that would be 千里之行始于足下.
Yes, of course.
But I had to look that up because I don't use that phrase very much. But it's true, right? It's true.
Well, you don't look that up very much, but well, you did today.
Progress.
It's your first step, John.
All right, have a great year, everybody. You can learn Chinese.
Happy New Year. You can do it. You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. My name is Jared Turner, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series. My co-host is John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. If you loved listening to this podcast, please subscribe. Take a moment to share it with a friend or share it on social media. It really helps us to reach more people. You can leave us a review on iTunes or reach out to us at mandarincompanion.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find our Chinese Graded Reader Series on Amazon, iBooks, Google Play, or wherever you get your books. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Jasper Chua. And a special thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.